Hi, and welcome to another episode of Reminiscing with History Makers. Today I'm with Liz Phillips, the Public Safety Administrator and Assistant Director at University of Kansas. Liz, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So for starters, when did you join APCO?
Actually, my first year in APCO was about 1979. I didn't actually join. It's an interesting story for the people from Kansas. They needed a secretary treasurer. Nobody stood for election. So one of our longtime Kansas members by the name of Jimmy Gilliland went to my director. I'd only been working in the department for about a year, and they arranged for me to be secretary treasurer of APCO. I didn't know about it until I went to the meeting the next spring that they had put me in absentia. So I hadn't even been to a meeting yet. So that was, and then I was secretary treasurer for 8 years. So it was an interesting joining because I wasn't even a member when they voted me in, but I guess everybody shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, she'll pay her dues once we get her here.
Great. Can you describe your agency, position, and brief responsibilities there?
Right now, I'm the assistant director and the public safety administrator. In essence, what that means is, as I started out as a student dispatcher at the university, it was a job that I did my senior year in college. That summer after I graduated, unfortunately, my father had passed. I had 2 younger siblings at home and I needed to find a job. I was slated to go to law school, and I did do some time in law school until they changed their rules that you couldn't work part-time and go to law school, so I had to choose. I guess I decided I needed to eat and have an apartment, so I left the law school. I did everything to graduate except I didn't actually get the degree because I didn't do the final research semester, and nor did I take the bar. But so here I was, a dispatcher working for minimum wage. I went to the state commission with my director's permission and talked him into a full-time job. From there, I've worked my way up through the ranks. For many years, I've been the only female administrator in a non-academic position at the University of Kansas.
You mentioned you didn't have much of a say in it. Was there a particular person or course that drew you in?
Not really a course. Like I said, after they voted me into secretary treasurer, told me it would be real easy, was a piece of cake. They did have pretty good records. It was pretty easy to figure out and pick up. But what they hadn't told me is that 2 years after I started being secretary treasurer, they had applied to that point, it was just national APCO, it wasn't international, to hold what was called a regional conference. We were in the North Central region. Well, being the secretary treasurer of the Kansas chapter meant I got to be secretary treasurer of the regional conference as well. And I had never even been to a national conference. I had never been to a regional conference. But I was the secretary treasurer for that regional conference 2 years after I got in. So the guys that drew me in, they were just the board of directors. I knew them a little bit. Many of them were from in my area, and we had been in different trainings, but I was still a newbie. I was still new on the street, so I wasn't even a supervisor. I didn't become a supervisor for the area for almost 5 years later.
Can you describe your APCO activities at the state and national level during your tenure?
Like I said, I was secretary treasurer for 8 years. That's one of those jobs that once you get into, it's hard to get out of, because you do kind of get your own sense, but you run the conferences, you do all the registration, things like that, and manage the money. At the international level, I was on the first task force that wrote the first APCO SOP. That was 1987 maybe. And so we wrote the first SOP. I was on the first ADA task force looking at ADA issues. That was a joint task force with APCO and NENA. And then I was very interested, I've always been interested in history and where the organization came from. and an opportunity. The committee selection was much different in those days, but an opportunity came forward to sit on the history committee, the historical committee. At that time, what is now the Bradley piece of history was not part of the committee. It had its own foundation, and the foundation managed that. Once I got on the committee, then the foundation was rolled into that committee, and we became, Bradley became part of our adjunct, the Bradley History Museum.
What would you say you like most about APCO?
There's a lot of things. I think networking is big. I've always been a proponent of training, and I think that the training component, I know the vendors support us and we need the vendor show, but I've always been the biggest proponent of training because so many dispatchers across the nation don't get training, or maybe a training comes up that would be great, but somebody has to stay home and run the radio, so not everybody gets to go. And so I've always been a proponent of the training, so that would have to be it.
What would you say APCO does better than anyone else?
Once again, I think training. I think that's what their focus is. They focus on radio. You know, for years, believe it or not, we didn't worry about 911 training. We didn't have 911, or it was just basic. It was like any other phone number. We didn't have all the technical needs. The technical needs have come so far, and the needs of the telecommunicator to actually be able to manage so many different computerized aspects is just really astounding. You know, I always used to be amazed that my grandmother had never flown. Had never flew on an airplane. There were no airplanes when, you know, she was, but some of the things I've seen in this industry, we didn't have Annie Alley. 911 went through, and, you know, you said 911, what do you need, or whatever. But next gen, phase 2, next gen, all those things have really brought it up. But once again, it's not just about the 911 in my mind, it's about the overall dispatch component. The people who just answer 911 phones have a need, but the radio people have a need too.
Is there anything that you think APCO needs to do to move forward or stay current in the industry?
I think they need to continue to push that the 911, the radio, the dispatchers, the the public safety answering points are first responders. We've got that momentum going, and I think it needs to be kept going. Finally, somebody's listening to us that we are the first responders. Yeah, maybe we're not getting our hands dirty in the field, but mentally we're just as involved as anybody, any firefighter or any police officer or EMT.
Is there anything that stands out to you as a significant contribution that you were a part of during your time in office?
I don't know how significant it is. I had a great team on the historical committee, and that's always that will always be a significant contribution, I think, because that team, starting in about 2017, 2018, really came together and brought the historical committee back to life. They reinvigorated the Bradley collection. They reinvigorated the virtual online committee, museum, and now there are people that actually know what the historical, but it was a group effort. But I think that's probably one of the most significant. I feel grateful that I was able to be the voice for that group for about 3 years.
Well, we at the Historical Committee greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Now, this has been Reminiscing with History Makers. Liz, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.